The sound of her heels echoed like gunshots across the marble floor. Click, click, click. Evelyn Harper paused just inside the grand entrance of her riverfront estate, the polished air around her unnaturally still. No laughter, no TV, no Nora practicing piano, no Eli humming under his breath. Just silence. Too much silence. She narrowed her eyes, instinct flaring, that old deep mother's knowing a flicker in her chest that refused to die. She'd canceled a $1 million investor meeting 3 hours early, told no one, driven herself home under the veil of a golden Charleston sunset, and now her gut twisted. Something is wrong. The last of the light filtered through the towering glass walls Daniel once designed, golden streaks stretching like reaching fingers across stone and shadow. Evelyn adjusted her blazer crisp and tailored, then stepped deeper inside the house. Click, click. Each step whispered against memory. This home was her fortress, the crown jewel of Harper Botanical Resorts. And yet now it felt like it was holding its breath. She passed the staircase, paused by the arch to the east hallway. A faint glow. A thin, unnatural sliver of warm light bleeding through the crack under the living room door. Her heart stuttered. She moved forward. Nora, Eli. Before the names could fully leave her lips, a hand clamped over her mouth. Large, rough, smelling of soap pine and sweat. Her body tensed. She twisted, heart hammering. Who? Please, a man's voice breathed into her ear, urgent and low. Don't scream. Don't move. Her pulse thundered. Was this a break-in? An attack. I'm not here to hurt you, the voice rasped. But if he hears you, the kids might get hurt. Evelyn's eyes widened. The kids. She wrenched free and spun around. Richard Fenton, the janitor, the man she barely knew. He stood before her, disheveled, pale, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. His uniform shirt was wrinkled, his breath shaky, and yet his eyes, they burned with something desperate, something terrified. What the hell are you doing in my house? Evelyn, hissed voice, low but fierce. Have you lost your mind? Richard held up both hands, voice barely above a whisper. You need to see for yourself. But not through me. Through that door. He pointed to the thin line of light under the living room. Evelyn's breath caught. I didn't plan this, he added. But you coming home early? It might be the only chance. She stared at him, heart pounding. Where are my children? He didn't answer, just tilted his head toward the door. So she moved. Quiet as her heels would allow, Evelyn followed him to the edge of the hallway. Richard crouched, motioned for her to do the same. He slowly pointed to the door, the one she had just seen glowing with that strange light, and then to the base of the doorframe where the gap was just wide enough to see through. Evelyn lowered herself. The cold tile bit into her knees. She looked, and what she saw didn't make sense. Nora, 12, was kneeling on the stone floor. Her knees were red, her back straight, her lips pressed together so tightly they'd lost color. Beside her, Eli, 8 years old, mirrored her pose. His little hands trembled as he fought to stay still. In front of them stood Caleb, her husband, the man she married 11 months ago. He sipped from a crystal glass whiskey, amber in the light. His voice floated out, steady, smooth, like silk hiding razors. Your mother is a billionaire, he said, circling them slowly. Do you know what that makes you? Neither child answered. Caleb crouched in front of Eli. It makes you expensive. Eli flinched. Caleb straightened, sipped again. And if you don't learn how to behave, he continued, his tone, icy, you'll become a liability, a burden. He paused. Burden means something people want to get rid of. Nora's jaw trembled. She looked like she might speak, but then she caught her brother's glance. Eli's eyes were glossy with unshed tears, and that was enough to keep her silent. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. She felt bile rise. Her breath shortened. Her mind raced. What is this? When did this start? How long has this man, the man I brought into my home, been doing this? Her chest caved inward. I've been gone too much," she whispered, barely audible. Richard's voice cut through her thoughts, hoarse, soft, but razor-sharp. "It's been going on longer than you think." She turned to him, eyes wild. He nodded. "And this?" He gestured toward the door. "This isn't even the worst of it." Evelyn froze. Richard looked at her jaw tight. "You need to see more. All of it. Before you make a sound." The silence between them held 1,000 questions, but none of them mattered more than the truth that had just shattered through her like glass. Behind that door, her children were suffering. In her house, on her watch, and the man she thought she could trust, the man she let into her home. Her family, her broken heart, was standing over them like a predator dressed in silk. A quiet, suffocating moment passed. Then Richard leaned in again. "I have proof. You just have to trust me now. For their sake." Evelyn swallowed. And for the first time in nearly a year, for the first time since she buried Daniel and forced herself to become steel, her armor cracked. She nodded. Not for Richard, not for herself, but for the 2 children kneeling just beyond that door. The door she would break down. Just not yet. Because this time she wouldn't miss the signs. This time she would see everything, and then she would act. But first, she had to watch. 3 years earlier, the world ended on a Tuesday morning. It was supposed to be ordinary. The smell of fresh ground coffee, Nora laughing at the cereal box comic strip, Eli running through the hall barefoot, dragging his toy lion by the tail, and Daniel, tall, kind-eyed Daniel, grabbing his thermos, pressing a kiss to Evelyn's cheek as he whispered, "Don't work too hard today, all right." Then came the phone call. A wet road, a jackknifed truck, one moment of bad luck. Daniel Harper died less than 2 miles from the resort construction site he had designed himself, the flagship of their family dream. The man Evelyn had built an empire with, the only person who ever truly understood her, was gone in the time it takes to blink. She didn't cry at the funeral. She shook hands, signed paperwork, took meetings. She didn't scream into pillows or collapse in the kitchen or sleep with his shirt beside her. She worked and worked and worked, because if she stopped even for a second, she might feel something. Grief became a shadow that followed her, but never dared speak her name. She thought she was protecting the children by holding everything together, but the cracks were already forming. Nora stopped playing piano. The garden Daniel built for her, once blooming with lavender and hummingbird mint, sat silent. She would sit there after school, cross-legged in the corner near the mossy stones, just watching. Eli stopped smiling in the car. Thunderstorms made him crawl under tables. He clutched his lion tighter and asked the same question each night. Is Daddy coming back when the rain stops? And Evelyn buried herself in quarterly reports, expansion meetings, brand overhauls, anything that didn't require human emotion. If she couldn't fix her children's broken hearts, she could at least build something indestructible. That's when she decided to renovate the old glass house. Daniel's final, unfinished project, a terrarium garden meant for guests, research, and local schools. Now, it stood like a ghost in the backyard. She posted a hiring notice for property upkeep. She needed someone cheap, discreet, and good with plants. 2 weeks later, Richard Fenton arrived. He looked nothing like what she expected. Broad shoulders, sun-dried skin, maybe in his early 50s, maybe older. His resume was unusual, former botany lecturer now applying for a janitorial position. Quiet, understated, didn't smile unless spoken to. Evelyn raised a brow at the last page of his file. You taught at Appalachian State. Richard just nodded. So why are you applying to clean greenhouses and polish windows? His eyes didn't flinch. I need a quiet job, and this place seems quiet. She almost dismissed him, but he was overqualified and underpaid, and something about his voice, low, grounded, no need to impress, felt strangely solid. So she hired him. For months, Evelyn barely noticed the man. He moved like background music, sweeping, fixing cracked tiles, oiling hinges. Never asked questions, never lingered. Eli called him the glasshouse guy. Nora didn't even say his name. Until one day, Evelyn came home early from a site inspection. The rain had come in sudden sheets that afternoon, heavy, relentless southern storm rain. Her heels tapped through the hallway, and something made her pause by the old greenhouse. Through the misty glass, she saw them. Richard, sitting cross-legged beneath a tree Daniel once planted, and beside him, little Eli tucked under an umbrella. Eli's face was red. Tear tracks streaked his cheeks. Evelyn was about to enter when she heard Richard's voice calm and low. "You know about the bristlecone pine." Eli sniffled. "No. It's one of the oldest trees in the world. It only grows in the coldest, hardest places, the kind of places most things would die." Eli looked up. Richard continued. "But not the bristlecone. You know why?" Eli shook his head. "Because it learns how to bend, not break." A pause. The rain tapped on the glass like fingertips. Sometimes Richard added, "Surviving hard things doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're growing the kind of roots that hold on even when the world gets mean." Eli didn't say anything. He just leaned against Richard's arm and let the silence sit. Evelyn stood frozen outside. Her throat tightened. She, their mother, hadn't even known Eli still cried about Daniel, and yet this quiet janitor had seen it, sat with him, and said just the right thing. What kind of mother doesn't know how to hold her own son? What kind of woman builds a global brand but can't rebuild her own family? She turned away before they saw her. Later that night, Evelyn stood in Daniel's old office. The room hadn't changed much. His favorite leather chair. The photo of Nora on her first bike. Eli's muddy handprint art still taped to the side of the desk. She stared at the map of the garden he'd designed. His vision, lush, wild, full of secret corners for kids to hide and dream. Her hand brushed the corner of his desk. "You were the dreamer," she whispered silently. "I was just the engine. Without you, I don't know where I'm going anymore." Weeks passed. Richard never mentioned the moment in the greenhouse, never tried to talk to Evelyn beyond basic updates, but something shifted. Nora began sitting on the greenhouse steps after school. Eli sometimes brought Richard rocks and sticks asking if they were special. And Evelyn, she started noticing again, noticing Nora's forced smiles, noticing Eli's bruises from gym class, noticing the absence of Daniel in all their lives, a growing hole that couldn't be filled by money schedules or new construction. And in that fragile space of grief and guilt, Caleb Monroe arrived. But that part of the story, his part, was still a few months away. For now, Evelyn still believed that strength meant being silent, still believed that love could be delegated, outsourced, still believed her children just needed time. And in that belief, she missed the warning signs, the ones Richard saw, the ones she would come to regret ignoring. The ballroom glowed like a constellation chandeliers glittering above laughter and violins. Evelyn Harper, wrapped in a silver gown that looked as cold as her reputation, smiled for the cameras and raised another glass of champagne she didn't plan to finish. It was a charity gala for Charleston's Children's Foundation, a cause she supported every year but never really felt. Tonight was no different, at least until the man at the bar turned toward her. Caleb Monroe. He was taller than most, with an easy smile and that quiet southern confidence that slipped under your skin before you realized it. His tuxedo was pressed, his cufflinks subtle, but it was his voice, low, smooth, with a hint of sadness that made Evelyn look twice. "I was told I'd find the most intimidating woman in Charleston somewhere near the silent auction," he said, half grinning. Evelyn arched an eyebrow. "You found her?" He laughed softly. "Good. Then maybe you can tell me which painting I'm supposed to overpay for." It was supposed to be small talk. But when he spoke of loss, his wife's long battle with illness, the quiet nights after she was gone, Evelyn felt something stir inside her she hadn't allowed for years. He didn't pity her. He didn't flatter her. He simply understood. She found herself talking about Daniel for the first time in months, about the garden he never got to finish, the children who missed him in ways she couldn't fix. Caleb listened, head slightly tilted, eyes warm but steady. "You know, he said quietly. "The people we lose never really leave. Sometimes the best way to honor them is to keep living, not just surviving, but living for both of you." The words hit her like a confession she didn't know she needed. By the end of the evening, they had spoken about everything business music raising children alone, the strange guilt of smiling again after loss. When he walked her to her car, he didn't ask for her number. He simply said, "I hope I see you again, Evelyn Harper." And she hoped he would. Over the next few weeks, she did see him again at fundraisers' luncheons, even once at a bookstore, where she was sure it couldn't be coincidence. Caleb had a way of appearing exactly where she needed distraction. He wasn't like the men who tried to court her after Daniel's death, the ones who saw her fortune first and her grief second. Caleb talked about ideas, not mergers. He remembered that Eli loved dinosaurs, that Nora hated thunderstorms. He was charming, but never pushy. Warm, but never intrusive. The perfect gentleman. Evelyn began inviting him to lunches that felt suspiciously like dates. Sometimes they walked by the river talking about resilience and second chances. Caleb told stories about his late wife, about his years volunteering at hospitals, about the pain that had made him gentler, not harder. And Evelyn, the woman who had built an empire by never needing anyone, found herself softening. Still, not everyone was convinced. One afternoon, she caught Richard watching them through the greenhouse window. She'd just introduced Caleb to the staff, mentioning casually that he might consult on the new resort wing. Richard didn't say a word, just nodded and went back to polishing glass. Later, as Caleb helped Eli fly a paper plane across the courtyard, Richard's gaze lingered again. What Evelyn asked. "You don't like him?" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "He's polished," she frowned. "That's not a crime." "No, ma'am. But sometimes polish hides the cracks underneath." Evelyn's tone cooled. "You don't know him." Richard nodded once. "You're right. I don't." He didn't look at her again that afternoon, but his words clung like humidity. As months passed, the line between gratitude and affection blurred. Caleb knew exactly when to appear, when Evelyn's board meetings ran long, when Nora came home crying about a test, when Eli scraped his knee. He made everything easier. "Let me help," he'd say, taking the grocery bags or fixing the door hinge or offering to pick up the kids from school. Evelyn didn't realize how quickly she began depending on that phrase. "Let me help." And then came the night he told her he loved her. It was raining soft and steady, the kind of Charleston rain that smells like salt and memory. They sat by the fire glasses of wine untouched. Caleb reached for her hand, his thumb brushing the diamond band she still wore. "You don't have to keep proving you're strong," he said. "You've done enough." Evelyn looked away. "I don't know how to be anything else." He smiled, tender and patient. Then, "Let me remind you." When he kissed her, it didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like relief. Their wedding was small, elegant, tasteful, the kind of ceremony that made headlines only because of who she was. The press called it a second spring for the Harper dynasty. Evelyn smiled, for the photos told herself she deserved happiness. Nora wore a pale yellow dress. She smiled for the pictures too, but her eyes darted between Caleb and her mother as if trying to read a language she didn't yet understand. Eli clung to Evelyn's hand through the vows. When Caleb bent down afterward and said, "Call me Uncle Caleb for now, okay," Eli just nodded, unsure. From a distance, Richard watched through the tall glass of the greenhouse he'd cleaned that morning. His reflection merged with theirs, the family framed in sunlight, perfect, untouchable. He wiped a streak from the glass, though it wasn't dirty. The first few weeks were peaceful. Caleb cooked breakfast. He joked with the kids. He brought Evelyn coffee in bed before her meetings. He seemed to know every invisible burden she carried and how to make it lighter. When she thanked him one night, he smiled and said, "You've carried this family long enough. Let someone else be the anchor for once." She didn't realize anchors could drag you down as easily as they held you steady, but the first shadow came quietly. At dinner one evening, Nora reached for her phone at the table. Caleb's tone sharpened. "No phones during meals." We talk as a family." Evelyn almost smiled. It sounded reasonable. Until Nora's face paled. She murmured an apology so quick it trembled. Richard was fixing the garden lights outside within earshot. He heard Caleb's voice drop lower, heard the scrape of a chair. "Say it again," Caleb said. "Sorry," Nora whispered. Louder. "Sorry, sir." The rain outside grew heavier. Richard paused, listening. When the conversation turned light again, he exhaled quietly, unseen. A few weeks later, at another charity gala, Evelyn stood on stage as Caleb beamed up at her from the audience, his hand proudly on Nora's shoulder. The perfect picture of a blended family. The applause thundered, cameras flashed, and yet through the glass doors near the back Richard's eyes met Evelyn's just for a second. Something in that look, steady, uncertain warning, made her chest tighten. For the briefest moment, she thought she saw Daniel in the reflection behind him. Then the lights shifted, and the illusion was gone. For the first few weeks, Caleb wore helpfulness like a second skin. He arrived at dawn with grocery bags that smelled of rosemary and warm bread. He left late with the click of a kitchen drawer that always sounded practiced comfortable. The house, once a maze of responsibilities for Evelyn, felt lighter. In small ways, the coffee was on before her meetings. The mail was sorted. Backpacks were laid by the door. He had an easy laugh that filled empty rooms, and for a woman who had learned to measure love in leverage and schedules, his timing felt like salvation. "Thank you," she thought more than once as she boarded a plane or stepped into a boardroom. "Thank you for being ordinary when everything else is chaos." He called it structure. At first, it was sensible. "Rules help children feel safe," he said when Evelyn glanced at the whiteboard he'd hung in the kitchen, neat handwriting listing chore shifts and homework times. Nora rolled her eyes but complied. Eli tapped the list with a finger like it was a new toy. Caleb's rules were practical lights out at 9 shoes by the Dorr family dinners at 6. They were lines drawn in paint, easy to follow, easier to praise. He taught the kids to set the table to say please and thank you to hang jackets. Evelyn liked that. She liked that someone else noticed the little things, that someone else could translate care into routine. Only the tone began to change. She first heard it the night Nora came home late from helping a friend clean up after school. Rain had pushed puddles into crescent shapes across the driveway. The house sighed with the swell of damp air. Nora walked in soaked at the collar carrying a box of charity bake sale cookies. Evelyn barely had time to call "How was" when Caleb's voice cut through the hallway precise as a scalpel. "You were late." It wasn't a question. Nora froze the box, trembling between her hands. "Why were you late?" Caleb asked, his voice measured. Not angry, just deliberate. Evelyn moved to intervene to diffuse, but something in the way Caleb looked at her daughter, patient, angling for correction, made her hesitate. "It was just 10 minutes, she said. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Rules are rules. If you're late, you stand here and think about responsibility." He pointed at the kitchen's checkerboard tile. Nora's shoulders curled inward. She stood there, knees locked silently. 10 minutes stretched into 20. The grandfather clock in the foyer, one Daniel had repaired months before, ticked louder with each second, its pendulum a metronome against Nora's quiet shame. Evelyn watched the color drain from her daughter's face. Her pulse pounded like a small drum. Is this discipline or humiliation? She thought the thought sharp and immediate. Am I teaching her strength or teaching her fear? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Caleb's tone softened when she looked at him, apologetic and cleverly constructed. "I'm teaching her consistency." He told her the weight of his logic anchoring him. She needs to learn consequences. So Evelyn let it be. She told herself that there would be balancing tenderness later, that discipline was part of parenting. She thought of the investor meetings she had to attend, the resorts to expand the contracts that would not sign themselves. Practicality, she told herself. Structure. But discipline metastasized. The rules multiplied. The voice that enforced them gained texture, not always loud, often cold and steady, precise as a surgeon. Caleb began to prescribe more than schedules. He graded affection. He rationed praise. He decided what counted as gratitude and made them recite it like prayers. One afternoon, Eli reached for his milk and knocked the carton over. The sound was small paper and plastic, a soft puddle spreading across the kitchen tiles. Eli's face crumpled. Before he could move, Caleb's voice came clean and controlled. "Stand there. Hands on your head." Eli did as told. Caleb handed him a rag. "Clean it until the floor is shiny. No crumbs, no streaks. You will not waste food in this house." Eli knelt on cold tile rubbing until his hands hurt and his knees burned. He worked in silence while Evelyn watched the slow, methodical scraping of skin across stone. The kitchen clock chimed the quarter hour. The house hummed like an engine. Somewhere deep inside her, a part of Evelyn, the part that still remembered Daniel's soft reprimands, ached. That night, Eli's small body trembled as he climbed into bed. He wrapped a quilt around himself and clutched his stuffed lion as if it could shield him. Nora slept with her back to him, legs drawn up as if putting distance between the siblings might protect them from what they felt. Evelyn sat at the end of the bed, the moonlight cutting a pale stripe across the duvet. She had been standing in a room that no longer felt wholly hers. "I married for safety," she told herself, trying to summon a steadying thought. "I married for a partner, not a commander." Caleb's words in the kitchen, "You will not waste food," reverberated through her mind like a sentence that needed parsing. At first, she excused it. Parents could be strict. People had different styles. Then came the whispering. When she called to check schedules or confirm flights, Caleb's voice would smooth over the line like oil. "Focus on the meeting, love. I'll handle it. You're better at the grand things." His praise was a net that kept her from looking too close, and when she did glance, he would find a way to convince her that her worries were misplaced. "You're reading too much into this. I'm doing what's best." She had told herself with the economy of a CEO that trust required delegation. The delegation, however, had a ledger of its own. Caleb introduced punishments that were precise and inventive. Food withheld as consequence. Sleep delayed as lesson. Standing times extended into hours. Not explosive, but surgical, the kind of slow erosion that made children shrink inward without leaving visible marks. One wet evening, a storm winded the house, making the old glass tremble. The living room lamps burned warm and steady as the children were ordered into positions they could not understand. Nora was told to stand in the corner, arms crossed over her head. Eli to kneel by the sofa, hands clenched. Caleb moved among them like a teacher checking homework, slow and clinical. Evelyn, home from a long trip, arrived to a silence that tasted metallic. She stood at the threshold, breath caught, panting from the weight of travel and the sudden smell of rain and dish soap. Her mouth went dry as she took in the sight, two small figures on the cold stone, Caleb's silhouette between them, his back to her. He looked up, saw her, and his smile was the perfect blend of surprise and composure. "Welcome home," he said. His voice was the same voice that had charmed the gala. It had teeth. Evelyn stepped forward, furious and stunned. "What is this?" Caleb turned, fixing her with eyes that had, in the bright social light of before, seemed reassuring. "It's important they learn to listen, to obey. You know how business runs, Evelyn. Order is the only way to keep chaos from creeping back." He lifted the glass he had been holding. The clink of crystal sounded dismissive. Her throat felt tight. She could smell the lemon on his hands, the whiskey in his glass, the damp of the storm pressing at the window panes. She wanted to rush forward and scoop her children into her arms. Caleb's voice dropped, intimate and precise. "If a single word of this gets out, if anyone tells you in a way the authorities or your image could learn, I promise you this." He leaned in his breath, measured an echo of the first night she'd returned early. "They will be taken from you. You will not see them again in this house." The tiles seemed to tilt. A clock in the hall clicked as if trying to keep time with her racing heart. Nora's shoulders shook. Eli's small breath hitched. The children looked at their mother with eyes that suddenly did not know how to plead. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. Her mind spun like a carousel of images. Legal battles, custody threats, a headline that could destroy more than a marriage. For a brief 6 seconds, the room constricted into one impossible decision: to yell and risk losing everything, or to stay silent and watch them suffer. Richard's distant voice, she could almost hear him, had said the janitor would wait until she could see all of it before acting. She remembered his insistence on proof, his patient low tones, the way he'd refused to be a rumor. She swallowed, feeling the acid of fear and grief mix in the back of her throat. Caleb's hand hovered near the doorway as if blocking any forward movement. His face was too calm, practiced. "You're a public woman, Evelyn. Think carefully. Imagine what people will say if there's scandal. Think of your company, your children's security. Think of the consequences." Nora's lower lip trembled. Eli made a small sound like a held-in sob. In the hush that followed, the house seemed to listen. Then Caleb leaned close enough that Evelyn could smell his cologne like cedar and something metallic, and said flat as a verdict, "If a word of this reaches me from anyone other than you, it will not end well for them." Evelyn wanted to pull out her phone to call the police, to do anything that would break the hold the room had on her. But the line between a mother's instinct and a CEO's calculation had never felt so fine. The fear he planted in her was not crude. It was legal-minded, surgical. It wrapped itself in the language of custody, reputation, consequence. She stepped back. Her knees gave just a fraction. Inside, something old and iron-hard, the part of her that had survived Daniel's death and turned into steel, began to bend. The thunder outside rolled over the roof like an answering drumbeat. Eli's breath hitched. Nora's eyes filled. The sentence hung in the air like the last note of a slowly dying violin. "They belong to me." Evelyn thought the thought raw and immediate, and I will not let him take them. Not like this. But the house had already learned a new rhythm. The rules had grown teeth, and the quiet, obedient shapes of her children in the lamplight looked like they had been carved to fit them. It was the sound of quiet crying that first changed everything for Richard. Late one Thursday evening, he stayed behind to clean the eastern wing of the house. The greenhouse had flooded during a sudden downpour, and water crept along the tile edges like dark fingers. He moved in silence, mop in hand, the world dim and echoing around him. The air carried the scent of wet soil, pine cleaner, and something else. A sound, soft, fragile. Not the whimper of someone in pain. No, this was quieter, more practiced. The kind of crying that knew it shouldn't be heard. Richard paused, heart-pulling taut. He followed the sound, stepping carefully between wet footprints until he reached the glass corridor near the back garden. And there, curled beside the base of a terracotta planter, sat Eli. Tiny, shoulders shaking. The boy didn't notice him at first. He was whispering into his lion. "I was good," Eli murmured, wiping at his nose. "I was good today. I didn't mess up." Richard crouched slowly. "Hey." Eli startled, then froze. His first reaction was not fear of being found crying. It was fear of being punished for it. "It's okay," Richard said, gently sitting beside him on the cold floor. "I was just cleaning. Didn't mean to scare you." Eli didn't respond. He curled tighter. "Mind if I sit here a minute?" Eli gave the tiniest shake of his head. For a while, they said nothing, just the ticking of the outdoor lights and the distant rattle of thunder overhead. Then Richard said softly, "Sometimes it feels like the whole world is upside down, doesn't it?" Eli nodded slowly. Richard leaned his elbows on his knees. "When my daughter was your age, she used to hide under the kitchen table when she was sad. Said it made her feel small enough for the bad stuff to miss her." Eli sniffled. "Did it work?" Richard paused. "Sometimes." A long silence followed then. Eli whispered, "Caleb said not to cry. Said only babies cry." Richard's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice soft. "You know what? I think crying is something brave people do when the world's too heavy. And I think you're one of the bravest kids I've met." Eli looked at him then. really looked. And what Richard saw in the boy's eyes wasn't just sadness, it was confusion. Deep, aching confusion about what was right and what was wrong. And in that moment, something inside Richard shifted. It started small. He began noticing things more closely, the way Nora flinched at loud footsteps, how she always asked for extra chores on the nights Evelyn was away, how Eli stopped laughing at cartoons. Richard started a notebook. Nothing dramatic, just observations. April the 10th. Eli asked if Caleb knew I saw him spill juice. He looked nervous. April the 14th. Nora walked with slight limp. Said it was gym class. April 17th. Caleb spoke to both kids in the study. Door closed. Nora came out pale. Still Richard said nothing. He knew how fragile this was. He was the janitor. Invisible. Replaceable. One wrong move and he'd be out the door with no way back in. But silence wasn't an option either, because the patterns were growing louder. Eli's artwork disappeared from the fridge. Nora stopped wearing bright colors. The air in the house became something new, not fear exactly, but anticipation of punishment, like a thunderstorm about to break. One morning, Richard found Nora sitting in the greenhouse alone, her knees pulled to her chest. She didn't cry. She didn't look at him. But when he placed a cup of warm tea beside her, she whispered, "If I tell someone, will he go away?" Richard knelt beside her. "Do you want him to?" Nora didn't answer. She stared at the floor, then quietly said, "He says if Mom knew, she'd send us away. Because we're the problem." That night, Richard didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling of the small quarters he was given on the property, haunted by a voice from another lifetime. His daughter Lila had once said something similar right before the flood, right before he'd put the car in drive despite the weather warnings. "If we don't go now, Daddy, she'll be mad." And he'd said yes. He'd said, "We'll be fine." But they weren't. He'd buried both his wife and daughter 3 days later. That guilt had never left his bones. So now, with Evelyn's children slowly fading in front of him, Richard made a choice. Not this time. Not again. He bought 3 hidden cameras. Tucked them high in corners near vents, never in the bedrooms. Always in public areas, the kitchen, the main hall, just outside the living room. He told no one. Every night after sweeping and locking up, he downloaded the footage onto an encrypted drive. At first, it showed nothing. Caleb smiling, making dinner, laughing at something on TV. Then came the moments in between. Caleb gripping Eli's wrist too hard when he thought no one was watching. Nora standing perfectly still for 20 minutes while Caleb lectured her about female composure. Eli being made to kneel for forgetting to set out the dinner forks. Each time Richard watched in silence. Eyes rimmed red, hands clenched. And then the footage got worse. One evening, after Evelyn had flown to New York for an investors' summit, Richard clicked through footage to check the front corridor camera. He found a clip from the night before. Caleb standing over the children, glass in hand. "You think she'd keep you if she knew what you're really like," he said, voice low and venomous. "She's rich. She doesn't need baggage." Nora shook her head. "We're not. Shut up. You're only here because I let you be here. And if you say one word to her, I'll send you so far away she won't even remember your names." Richard pressed pause. His own face reflected in the dark screen. The same expression he'd worn the night before the flood. That night he stood in the garden until dawn, listening to the wind rustle through Daniel's trees. He whispered to the memory of his daughter, "I didn't save you, but I'll save them." The next day he tried again, gently, cautiously. He approached Evelyn in the hallway outside her office. "Miss Harper," he said, "about the kids, I've noticed some things. About Mr. Monroe." Evelyn, distracted, barely looked up. "Richard, I appreciate the concern, but Caleb's doing his best. He's just trying to instill some structure." Richard hesitated. "Sometimes structure has sharp edges." Her tone shifted curt. "I know what I'm doing." He nodded once. "Of course." He said nothing else. But that night he added a lock to the drawer where he kept the hard drive. Then came the night that would change everything. April 26th. Rain again. Eli spilled his drink during dinner. Caleb grabbed his shirt, dragged him to the corner, forced him to kneel on a tile with a coin under each knee. You move. You eat nothing tonight. Nora tried to object. Caleb snapped at her. Another word, and you'll join him. The camera above the hallway captured it all. The stormlight flickered behind the glass. Richard watched from his quarters, and for the first time he didn't just feel helpless. He felt furious and awake. As the screen played on, Richard whispered to no one, I wasn't there for Lila, but I'm here now, and this time, I won't just watch. The boardroom smelled of glass and power. Evelyn Harper stood at the head of the long mahogany table, her reflection crisp in the polished surface, her presence commanding even in silence. The Paris expansion deal was days from closing, and every eye in the room was fixed on her as she prepared to sign. A legal pad lay open before her. The ink of the pen trembled slightly as she lifted it, then paused. Her phone buzzed. A single text. From Nora. Mom, are you busy? I just miss you. That was it. No emojis, no punctuation beyond the question mark. Simple, short, and somehow louder than anything said in the room all day. Evelyn stared at the message. Something in her stomach turned. It wasn't like Nora to text during school hours, and it wasn't like Nora to ask for attention, not anymore. She locked the phone and looked up, lips poised to continue the meeting. But her mind wouldn't obey. Nora never interrupts unless something's wrong. Wasn't she quiet last night? And Eli? He barely touched his breakfast. Her hand reached for the phone again. She dialed. 1 ring. 2. Straight to voicemail. She tried Eli's line. Nothing. A flicker of unease scratched at the back of her throat. She tried the house line next. Caleb picked up on the 3rd ring. Everything's fine, sweetheart, he said before she could even speak. Nora just had a rough morning. She's a bit stressed about a science project. I've got it under control. You just focus on that big contract, okay? His voice was syrupy smooth. It coated every word with reassurance, almost too smooth. Evelyn tried to ignore the twinge, but it pressed against her sternum like a breath she couldn't exhale. She hung up slowly. Silence returned to the boardroom, thick and expectant. Her assistant leaned closer, whispering, "Ma'am, they're ready." Evelyn stared at the dotted line. Then she heard her daughter's voice again, not the text, but the way Nora had sounded 2 nights ago, standing by the stairs, eyes wide. "Can I stay up a little later tonight? I don't want to go to bed yet." The kind of voice that meant I don't feel safe there. Her pen dropped. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said, gathering her bag. "Family emergency." The room gasped softly as she walked out. Rain kissed the windshield as she sped home. The sky was overcast, painted in shades of blue-gray and apprehension. With each passing mile, Evelyn's thoughts fractured into flashes, Nora flinching when Caleb touched her shoulder. Eli asking why Daddy Daniel never made him kneel. The quiet, the hesitation, the too careful silence around Caleb's name. No. Stop rationalizing. You've ignored the signs long enough. As the car curved along the riverside, she dialed Richard. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. Then a text. "Stay calm. I'm watching them. Come to the back entrance. Don't let Caleb see you." Her foot pressed harder on the gas. Inside the house, it was quiet. Too quiet. Richard stood in the hallway near the service corridor, eyes locked on a monitor mounted discreetly inside a panel in the wall. "They're in the living room," he whispered. He made them kneel again. "It's escalating." Evelyn's breath hitched. "You came home at the right time," he added. She followed his gaze to the screen. There they were. Nora on her knees, palms open, shoulders shaking but steady. Eli beside her head, bowed, lips trembling. And Caleb. Calm. Composed. Whiskey glass in hand. His voice filtered through the mic. "You think your mother wants to come home to 2 whiny broken children. You think she doesn't see what a burden you are?" Eli sniffed, tried not to cry. Caleb crouched to Nora's level. "She doesn't love you. Not really. She loves being admired. She loves her company. You're just the noise in her way." Richard turned off the audio before Evelyn could break. She staggered back. One hand flew to her mouth. The other gripped the edge of the panel like an anchor. "Dear God," her voice cracked. "How long has this been happening?" Richard's voice was low, steady. "Long enough. I have hours of footage. Every time you left for a trip." He got bolder. She looked at him, eyes wild. "Why didn't you tell me sooner I tried?" he said, quiet but firm. "But I'm a janitor. He's your husband. The last time I hinted, you defended him. I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof." Tears stung the edges of her eyes. "My kids. They've been living in fear. And you've been surviving too," Richard said, just differently. His gaze didn't flinch. "But now you're here. You see it." She turned back to the screen. Eli had slipped, falling forward. Caleb grabbed his arm too hard, too fast. That was the last straw. Evelyn straightened. Her voice was calm. Dangerous. "What's the plan?" Richard exhaled. "You go in. Get the kids out. I'll be watching from the back corridor with my phone recording. He won't try anything if you're calm." She nodded once, then again slower. Her hands smoothed the front of her coat. Her fingers no longer shook. "I'm done being blind," she whispered. "Tonight it ends." Evelyn walked down the hallway, each footstep measured heavy with resolve. Past the family photos she no longer believed in. Past the flower vases that Caleb insisted made the house feel civilized. She pushed open the door to the living room. The scent of leather and liquor hit her like a wave. Caleb turned surprised. "Evelyn, you're home early." She didn't answer him. Her eyes were locked on her children, her daughter stiff as stone and her son who couldn't even lift his head. "Stand up," she said to them, her voice sharp, controlled. "Come here. Now." Caleb stepped between them. "Honey, what's this?" "We were just—" "Move." Her voice sliced through the room like a blade. The children ran to her, clung to her. Evelyn wrapped her arms around them like armor. She looked back at Caleb, and though she said nothing yet, her eyes burned with the fury of a mother betrayed. From the hallway, Richard watched it all unfold. He held his phone steady, filming every second. His hand trembled, but his heart, for the first time in years, did not. The door clicked shut behind her like the final move in a chess game. Evelyn stood frozen in the dim hallway outside the living room, her arms still wrapped around Nora and Eli. Their bodies trembled against her, not from cold, but from something deeper, more internalized, like fear had seeped into their bones. Just minutes ago she had stepped into her home believing she had control, that she knew her life. Now everything she thought was true had shattered like fine glass on stone. "I need to see everything," she whispered. Richard gave a small nod. "Follow me." He led her down the back hallway, past the wine cellar and staff quarters, into a room she hadn't entered in months. A storage space converted into Richard's makeshift surveillance station. Wires twisted behind a wall panel. 4 small screens glowed with grainy but undeniable truths. The angles were discreet above the fireplace, the stairwell landing the kitchen doorway, and the hallway just outside the children's bedrooms. Each screen played back time-stamped footage, and each frame held a betrayal. "I started recording 3 months ago," Richard said, his voice flat but taut. "I didn't want to believe it either." Evelyn stepped forward. Her hand reached for the edge of the table to steady herself. The first video began. Eli in the kitchen accidentally dropping a spoon. Caleb's voice boomed clumsy again. "Pick it up. No dinner until that floor shines." The boy knelt, scrubbed. The next, Nora standing silently, forced to recite a list of things she needed to do better, each line harsher than the last. Her voice cracked. Her face was blank. Another clip. Caleb pressing a finger to Eli's chest, whispering, "Your real father's gone. I'm the only one who decides if you belong here." Evelyn felt her knees threaten to buckle. Richard handed her a chair before she collapsed. More footage. Caleb telling Nora she was nothing but a reflection of her mother's ambition and that strong women raise weak children. The images played without mercy. Caleb's tone was rarely raised. He didn't slap, didn't leave bruises that would show. But his words, his precision carved into the children with surgical cruelty, invisible wounds that bled quietly. Evelyn's fingers clenched the armrest until her knuckles blanched. "I didn't see it," she said, voice hollow. "I thought he was just strict." Richard didn't answer. She turned to him. "Why didn't I see it?" He hesitated, then spoke. "Because you were surviving. Because you were told, like a lot of women are, that partnership means delegation, that a second chance means compromise." She shook her head slowly as if trying to wake from a nightmare. "I left them alone with him. I trusted him." Her voice broke. "My babies." Richard stepped forward, not touching her but grounding her with his presence. "He fooled you. He fools everyone. But you're here now, and they know that." She turned back to the screen. The most recent footage was still recording a live feed of the living room. Caleb was pacing. Alone now. He poured another drink. "Is he dangerous?" She asked the question like ash on her tongue. Richard's face was unreadable. Not in the way that leaves black eyes. But yes, he's dangerous. To them. To you. He's a man who believes control is love. That fear is structure. She exhaled slowly. Then with a new steadiness she said, "This ends tonight." Richard nodded once. "I've copied the footage to 3 drives. One's with a lawyer I trust. One's with me. And this one," he pulled a slim USB from a panel drawer, "is yours." She took it. It was lighter than it should have been for something so heavy. Evelyn stood. "Get the kids to the guest house. Lock the doors. Don't let them out of your sight." "What about you?" Richard asked. "I'm going to tell him what happens next." She entered the living room like a storm in heels. Caleb looked up casual as ever. "Everything okay?" "No," she said plainly. He smiled a little confused. Nora and Eli seemed a little worked up. "I know everything, Caleb." The smile faltered. "I've seen the videos, heard the recordings, every threat, every punishment, every lie." He didn't speak, just blinked slowly. "I have copies, with legal counsel, and with the police if it comes to that." Now his smile returned colder this time. "Let me guess," he said, sipping his whiskey, the janitor. "He's been sniffing around you like a lost puppy. You're going to take his word over mine." "I don't need his word," she said. "I have yours. On tape." Caleb stepped forward slightly as if recalibrating. "Evelyn," he said slowly, "you're upset. I get it. Parenting is complicated. I was trying to help. You were never home." She cut him off. "Don't spin this. You didn't help. You controlled. You humiliated. You broke them down to feel taller." His eyes narrowed. "And what you think ripping this family apart is going to fix them. You think 2 broken kids and your precious company will love you more without me here." "They never loved you," she said flatly. "They were afraid of you." He stepped closer now, a shade too fast. "You're making a mistake." Richard appeared in the doorway, silent, calm, not moving, just there. Caleb noticed. His jaw twitched. "This house was peaceful before he came along," Caleb muttered. "This house," Evelyn said, "was silent." "That's not the same as peaceful." She turned slightly. "You will leave tonight. You will not contact me or the children. Any breach of that, and I will press charges. I have the resources, I have the proof, and I have nothing left to lose." For the first time, Caleb's mask cracked, and in that fracture Evelyn saw the man beneath not a mastermind, not a monster, just a small, bitter man with no more power left to wield. He stared at her. "You'll regret this." She met his eyes without blinking. "No, I regret not seeing it sooner." He walked out without another word. The door slammed behind him. Evelyn stood in the silence he left behind. It was a different kind of quiet than the one that filled the house before. Not tense, not expectant, just still. Free. She closed her eyes and let it sink in. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was drowning in her own home. Richard remained at the door, not speaking. She looked at him. For the first time, really looked. "You saved them," she said quietly. "No," he said. "You did. I just showed you where to look." The living room was quiet, unnervingly quiet. Evelyn stood just inside the doorway, back straight heels anchored to the marble floor like the foundation of the house depended on her stillness. Caleb sat in his favorite armchair legs, crossed swirling amber liquid in a crystal glass. Nora and Eli knelt near the fireplace. Their hands were folded in their laps, eyes locked on the floor bodies, rigid with a stillness that wasn't reverence, it was fear. Evelyn felt her breath catch, but this time she didn't flinch. She stepped forward. "Nora, Eli, come here." Her voice was not raised, but it held something deeper. Command. Safety. Caleb blinked, surprised. "Evelyn," he said, half smiling, "you're home early." "I said," she repeated, eyes still locked on the children, "come here." The children hesitated, not because they didn't want to, but because they'd been conditioned to fear what came after defiance. Evelyn's gaze softened just for them. "It's okay, babies. Come to me." Nora moved first. Her knees cracked as she rose, and she winced just barely. Eli followed, crawling to his feet, stumbling as if his legs had forgotten how to move freely. They reached her together. Evelyn knelt down and opened her arms. Nora collapsed into her shoulder. Eli buried his face against her neck. She held them like she hadn't in months, tightly protectively as if her body alone could shield them from the world. Then she looked up at Caleb. Her eyes had changed. So had her voice. "No one kneels in this house unless they're praying," she said. "And my children will never kneel before you again." Caleb set his drink down with care as if the crystal mattered more than the moment. "You're overreacting." Evelyn stood. "I've seen everything, Caleb." He blinked. "Seen what? The footage, the recordings, every word, every threat." He laughed, incredulous. "Oh, come on. Are you seriously listening to the janitor now?" Richard appeared in the doorway behind her, silent, watchful. Caleb's eyes narrowed. "This is his doing," he hissed. "He's had it out for me since day one. You think a man who polishes floors knows anything about parenting?" Evelyn didn't look away. "He knows more about love than you ever will." Caleb stepped forward. "So what now? You believe I'm the villain because I made them clean up after themselves. You want to throw away our marriage over discipline." "No," she said calmly. "I want to end it because you abused my children and manipulated me into thinking it was love." His smile faded. Evelyn handed him her phone. "Press play." He looked down at the screen. The audio started. His own voice filled the room. "Your real father's dead. Only I decide if you stay here." He froze. Nora gasped softly. Eli clung tighter. Richard stepped forward. "Don't say a word." Caleb's snapped jaw clenched. Richard didn't flinch. "I won't." Your voice already said enough. Evelyn stepped between them. "Leave." Caleb's mouth opened, then closed. "Leave, Caleb," she repeated. "This marriage is over. The lawyer will be in touch. You don't live here anymore. You can't. I can. And I will. Now." He looked at the children. "Nora," he said, voice low and coaxing. "Tell your mother. Tell her I've never hurt you." Nora's shoulders trembled. He stepped closer. "Nora, I hate you," she whispered. It was so soft Evelyn almost didn't hear it. "You said if I told her, she wouldn't want me anymore." Eli, tears slipping down his cheeks, said, "I don't want to be with you." Caleb stared at them. Something inside him shifted, a rage barely contained. His hand twitched like he might lunge. And then Richard stepped forward, standing at Evelyn's side. Silent. Solid. That was enough. Caleb looked at them, all of them, and saw it. He had no power here anymore. He picked up his glass, drank the last sip, and set it down with finality. "You'll regret this," he muttered. No one wants a woman with 2 broken kids. Evelyn smiled, slow sure. I'd rather be alone with them than chained to a man like you. Caleb stormed toward the door, grabbed his coat, and yanked it from the hook. He looked back once, and saw nothing but resolve. The door slammed behind him. The silence that followed was immense. It filled the space like air returning to lungs that had been starved too long. Evelyn knelt again, pulling the children close. "You're safe now," she whispered. "I'm so sorry it took me this long." Nora buried her face into her mother's chest. Eli clutched the edge of her blouse like it was the only thing keeping him from floating away. Richard stepped back, letting them have the moment. But Evelyn turned to him. "You stayed." "I said I would," he answered quietly. She stood and crossed to him. Her eyes met his. "I don't know how to thank you." He gave a small smile, weary and warm. "Don't thank me. Just never let anyone silence them again." Evelyn nodded. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. Not now, not yet. There was still more healing to come. But tonight this moment was theirs, and the storm was over. That night, Evelyn didn't send the children to their rooms. She didn't turn down the bedsheets or set out their pajamas or recite the gentle commands of a bedtime routine she hadn't truly participated in for months. Instead, she took Nora and Eli by the hand and led them to her bedroom, the one that had for so long held silence on one side of the mattress and regret on the other. The king-size bed still carried the faint scent of lavender from the pillow spray she used to mask the coldness of an empty house. But tonight, the space didn't feel empty. Evelyn tucked both children under the thick comforter, pulled the curtains closed, and switched off every light except the dim lamp near the corner, the same one Daniel used to read by. She crawled in beside them and lay on her back staring at the ceiling, listening to their breathing slow. Minutes passed. Then a whisper. Mom Nora's voice was tentative, unsure. "Yes, sweetheart. Do we still live here?" Evelyn turned toward her daughter, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Yes, this is your home." Nora blinked. "Even if he said we were problems." "You are never a problem," Evelyn said firmly. "You are my daughter, my heart, my whole world." She felt a small tug at her side. Eli had crawled closer. He looked up, eyes glossy. "Was it because of us? Did you marry him because you needed help with us?" Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She reached down, pulling him into her arms. "No, baby. It was because I needed help, and I didn't know how to ask the right people." She paused, holding back tears. "I thought having someone like him around would fix what felt broken. But the truth is, it wasn't you who needed fixing. It was me." There was silence again. Then, slowly, Nora reached out, fingers threading through Evelyn's. "You didn't see what he was doing, did you?" Evelyn shook her head. "No. And I'm so sorry." "We didn't tell you," Nora whispered, "because he said you'd send us away." Evelyn sat up, gathered both of them to her chest, and for the first time in so long, truly cried. Not quietly, not a dignified tear or two behind closed doors, but a storm of grief and guilt and relief that broke through the walls she'd built around her motherhood. "I love you," she sobbed. "Nothing you do, nothing you are could ever make me stop." Eli clutched her tighter. "Even if I'm scared all the time. Especially if you're scared," she whispered. "That's when you need love the most." They fell asleep like that, all three of them tangled together in a mess of forgiveness, finally breathing in the same rhythm again. Across the property in the staff quarters, Richard sat on the edge of his cot staring at a framed photo on the nightstand. His daughter, Lila, 7 years old, hair in pigtails, smiling through missing teeth. His fingers traced the edge of the frame as if memory alone could resurrect time. "She would have been 13, he murmured. Outside, wind rustled through the trees Daniel planted. Leaves danced across the greenhouse windows. Richard leaned back, stared at the ceiling, and whispered to the room, "I didn't save her, but I helped save them. That's gotta mean something. It didn't erase the pain, but it eased it. Just a little." Morning came slowly soft light stretching across the bedroom as the house exhaled its first full breath of freedom. Nora stirred first, then Eli. Evelyn was already awake watching them sleep like a mother discovering her children all over again. They looked lighter. Still tired. Still healing. But lighter. Later that morning, while the kids ate breakfast in the sunlit kitchen, Evelyn walked down to the supply wing where Richard was repairing a leak under the sink. She didn't speak right away, just watched him work calm and methodical, sleeves rolled up to the elbow. Finally, he noticed her. "I figured I'd fix this before someone slips," he said, standing. Evelyn smiled faintly. "I came to ask you not to leave." Richard paused. "Ma'am, don't call me that." "Not today." He gave a small nod. "I know you said your work here was done," she continued, "that the family didn't need you anymore." "They don't," he said. "Not like that." "But you're wrong," she replied, stepping closer. "If you leave, the first people who'll miss you are Nora and Eli, not me." Richard looked down, his hands rough and still. They already asked if Uncle Richard was staying for dinner. His eyes softened. "I think," she said gently, "they see something in you that they trust, something they feel safe with." He met her gaze. "They don't look at me like I'm broken anymore," she added. "And when I watch them look at you, I realize they don't think they're broken either." A pause. Then Richard said, his voice quiet. "I was supposed to drive a different route that night. The storm had flooded part of the county, but I didn't listen. I told them it would be fine, and I've been living with that decision ever since." Evelyn nodded. "I know what that kind of guilt feels like. I told myself I was building a future for my kids, and I missed the fact that they were suffering right in front of me." They stood in that quiet for a long moment, two people no longer running from the ghosts of their past. "Maybe," she said at last, "if we want to make peace with who we used to be, we need to do something with who we are now." He smiled, weary and real. "I'm not much of a hero. You don't need to be. You just need to stay." That night, Evelyn made dinner. Not a chef, not a catered tray. Her. She burned the garlic toast, overcooked the pasta, and laughed when Eli wrinkled his nose at the salad. It was imperfect, loud, messy. It was home. After dinner, the four of them sat in the greenhouse surrounded by the warmth of Daniel's glass walls, watching the stars blink into the Carolina sky. Nora read a chapter aloud from her favorite book. Eli curled up in the corner with his lion and a cookie. Richard adjusted the string lights near the ceiling, his silhouette casting long, gentle shadows across the room. And Evelyn. She watched them all. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. She just felt present, rooted, like a mother again. It started with a knock, soft, hesitant. 3 gentle taps on Evelyn's office door, not the firm knock of a colleague or the careless tap of a child asking for a snack. It was measured, nervous. She looked up from the budget report she wasn't really reading and called out, "Come in." Eli stood there clutching his lion. His bare feet shuffled against the rug, and he looked smaller than usual, like something had quietly undone him. Evelyn set her papers aside immediately. "Hey, buddy, everything okay?" He stepped into the room but didn't speak right away. Instead, he walked to the armchair beside her desk and climbed up the lion tucked protectively beneath his arm. "I was thinking," he said, after a long pause, "about Dad." She stilled. "You mean Daniel?" Eli nodded. "I don't really remember him," he said, eyes fixed on the lion's worn tail. "But Nora says he used to whistle when he made pancakes." A soft smile touched Evelyn's lips. He did. Off-key. Every single time. Eli leaned back against the chair. "Do you think? He would have liked me." The question came like a stone through glass. Shattering. Honest. Fragile. Evelyn stood and knelt beside him, taking his small hand in hers. "Eli," she said gently, "he would have loved you. Every part of you. Your big heart. Your brave questions. The way you protect your sister even when you're scared." Eli blinked quickly like he was trying to keep something from spilling. Then how come he left? She exhaled slowly. He didn't want to. The accident. It wasn't supposed to happen. He was coming home to us. Eli's lip quivered. But then Caleb said, "Stop," she said softly. "Whatever Caleb told you, it wasn't true. Daniel never gave up on you, and he never, ever would have let anyone hurt you." Eli nodded slowly, then pulled something from beneath the lion's belly, a folded piece of lined paper, slightly crumpled, covered in blocky pencil handwriting. "I wrote him a letter," he said, "even though he's not here." Evelyn took it with reverence. The top read, "To my first dad, the real one." She didn't read it aloud. She didn't have to. She saw the tear stains, the carefully erased misspellings, the drawing of a lion in the corner with a heart on its chest. Eli leaned into her. "Can we send it somehow?" Evelyn kissed his hair, breathing in the scent of childhood shampoo crayons, a little bit of peanut butter. "I think he already got it," she whispered. That night, Evelyn lit a candle on the back porch. Not because she believed in rituals, but because something inside her needed a physical way to release what had been held too tightly for too long. She sat with the letter on her lap, the lion on the chair beside her, and whispered into the dark, "Daniel. He's okay now. Our son is safe. I'm sorry it took me this long to find my way back." The wind rustled through the magnolias almost like an answer. Days passed, then a week. Life, it turned out, was not just about survival anymore. It was about rediscovery. Nora asked to visit the library downtown. Eli joined a pottery class at the community center. And Evelyn. She began to cook again. Not always well, but always with intention. She found herself humming Daniel's pancake tune one morning without realizing it, and Nora, halfway through her orange juice, looked up with wide eyes and said, "That's it. That's the sound I remember." The melody had anchored them all even in memory. One Saturday afternoon, Richard knocked on the greenhouse window where Evelyn was trimming dead leaves. He held a small wooden box. "What's this?" she asked, wiping her hands. Found it tucked behind a heating vent in the old storage room. "I think it's yours." She opened the lid. Inside Daniel's leather-bound journal. Evelyn gasped. "I thought this was lost." Richard stepped back, giving her space. She flipped through the pages, sketches of their dream home, clumsy but hopeful, notes about the kid's future, and one page dated just 2 days before he died. "If anything ever happens to me, I want Evelyn to know she's stronger than she thinks. She's the heart of this family. If the light ever goes out, she'll be the one to find the matches." Tears welled in her eyes. Richard didn't speak. He just nodded once as if to say, "You found them. You're relighting everything." Later that evening, while the kids were watching a movie, Evelyn walked into the kitchen and found Richard fixing a crooked cabinet door. She leaned against the doorway. "You fix everything, don't you?" He chuckled. "Some things are easier than others." She stepped closer. "You could have walked away, Richard. You didn't owe us anything." He set down the screwdriver and looked at her. Really looked. "I didn't stay because I owed you," he said. "I stayed because—" For the first time in a long time, it felt like I belonged somewhere. Their eyes held. And in that moment, quiet and unforced, something passed between them. Not romance. Not yet. But something steadier. A shared survival. A mutual respect. Maybe even the spark of what healing could grow into. That night, Evelyn lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The children were asleep. The house was still. She reached into the drawer of her nightstand and pulled out Daniel's journal again. Her fingers traced the ink. Her heart beat quietly, not in grief anymore, but in remembrance. She closed the journal and whispered, "I kept them safe. I found the matches." Outside, the lion nightlight in Eli's room glowed softly through the hallway. And somewhere in the garden, wind chimes sang gently beneath the stars. It began with dirt under her fingernails. Evelyn sat in the garden, the same garden Daniel once tended with quiet devotion, where each plant had a purpose and every vine knew where it belonged. The sun was warm on her back, the earth soft between her hands. She wasn't planting anything new that morning, just pulling out the weeds one by one, whispering softly as she worked like she was having a conversation with the past. Behind her, laughter rang out high, clear, unmistakably real. Eli and Nora were running through the sprinkler, their bare feet smacking wet stone, their clothes soaked and clinging, but they didn't care. They shouted and squealed free in a way she hadn't seen in years. Richard leaned against the porch post, sipping coffee. He wore the same worn flannel he always did on weekends, sleeves rolled, boots muddy. He smiled when their eyes met a small, steady smile that said, "You did this." And Evelyn smiled back. The weeks that followed Caleb's departure blurred into a kind of gentle unfolding. Nora began therapy sessions at school. She brought home drawings afterward, not of storms anymore, but of bridges and suns, and a woman with brown hair holding 2 children by the hand. Eli asked to take the lion to school for show and tell. He told his classmates the lion wasn't just a toy, it was a protector. "He watched over me when I was too little to fight back," he said, and his teacher cried behind her desk. Evelyn started writing again. Not for work, not for reports or obligations, but letters, long handwritten notes to Daniel that she kept in a wooden box beside the bed. Some were filled with guilt, some with gratitude. All of them ended with, "We're okay now." Richard stayed. He never moved into the house. That was never discussed, never even suggested. But every morning his truck was in the driveway. Every evening he helped tuck the kids in. And once, when Evelyn's hands trembled while chopping vegetables, he quietly took the knife from her and said, "Go sit." "I've got it." She did. And the world didn't fall apart. Spring came early. The cherry blossoms bloomed pink across the front yard, scattering petals like confetti on the windshield of Evelyn's car. The greenhouse filled with fresh herbs and potted succulents. The house smelled of rosemary and lemon, and the windows were always open. One Sunday afternoon, Evelyn stood by Daniel's old record player and dropped the needle onto a dusty vinyl. A jazz melody crackled through the room. She reached for Eli's hand and twirled him in a slow circle. Nora joined them, spinning with a mock-serious expression, arms overhead like a ballerina. Then Evelyn turned and held her hand out to Richard. He hesitated. "I don't dance much," he said. "I don't care," she replied, smiling. "It's not about the steps." He took her hand. They moved slowly, unsure at first, then easing into rhythm. It wasn't perfect. Their feet bumped. They laughed. He stepped on her toe. She stepped on his. But the warmth between them was undeniable. As they swayed, she whispered near his ear, "You've given us more than you'll ever know." And he replied, low and steady, "You gave me a place to begin again." One late evening, Nora crawled into bed beside her mother and asked the question Evelyn knew would come someday. "Do you think you'll ever marry again?" Evelyn paused. She looked at her daughter, the girl who once flinched at shadows and now laughed without fear. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I do know that love looks different now." Nora tilted her head. "How it's quieter," Evelyn said. "Not flashy, not loud, just present. It holds your hand when you're scared. It listens when you don't have the words. And it shows up, every day, without needing to be asked." Nora smiled. "Sounds like Richard." Evelyn smiled too. "Yeah, it does." On the anniversary of Daniel's death, they didn't mourn, not in the traditional sense. Instead, they held a picnic in the garden. They made pancakes and whistled while cooking them. They read stories Daniel once loved. Nora played a melody she composed herself on the keyboard called "For Dad." Eli placed his lion at the base of the oak tree with a note that said, "We're safe now. Thank you." Evelyn planted a small plaque in the ground. "In loving memory of Daniel Ward, the man who taught us how to grow." She didn't cry that day, not out of coldness, but because she finally believed he would be proud. Weeks later, on a golden Sunday, Evelyn stood on the porch watching Richard teach Eli how to fix a squeaky door hinge. Nora sat nearby, sketching in her notebook. Richard caught her watching and called out, "We could use a third hand." Evelyn walked down the steps, knelt beside them, and held the hinge steady. Like this, exactly like that. She looked at him. You've always known how to fix broken things. He looked back. Not broken, just waiting to be seen. The sun lit the edges of their faces, and in that moment Evelyn felt it settle deep and whole. Not the wild rush of first love, not the desperation of needing to be rescued, but peace. A steady, rooted peace. She leaned her head against his shoulder and whispered, "We're home." Sometimes healing doesn't come with fireworks or grand finales. It comes in whispers, in quiet choices, in the courage to say enough, and the even greater courage to say, "I deserve more." Evelyn's journey is a reminder to all of us. You are not defined by what broke you, but by how you choose to rebuild. Maybe you've walked through a storm like hers. Maybe you've been the child who waited to be heard, or the one who stayed silent, just trying to keep the peace. Maybe you're the friend, the neighbor, the witness, someone who saw something and wondered if you should say something. If this story spoke to you, if it touched a memory or opened a wound you thought had healed, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening? From have you ever lived a story like this or helped someone through one? Share your experience in the comments. Your words might be the light someone else is searching for. Drop your thoughts below. Tell us your city, your story, your strength. And if this story moved you even just a little, please consider subscribing to the channel. We have more journeys to tell, more voices to honor, more healing to share. Tap the bell so you won't miss the next story that just might speak to your heart. Thank you for spending your time here with us. It means more than you know. Until next time. Take care of your heart, and remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is begin again.